All right, first off, I'm gonna be walking around, so heads up camera people. I don't like stages. So this will be my 5th inbound, and one of the things that I've really learned over the years at Inbound is the best thing you can do is get out and network with people. How many people's met someone pretty cool that you're gonna talk to and network throughout the event? Okay, so the reason you had your hand up is the reason I lost my voice is because I've been talking to a lot of people throughout the event. So it's been really great seeing a lot of the agencies and all of that you work with online, but bear with me a little bit with the voice. There'll probably be a couple cracks. So, Sir Edmund Hillary, probably one of the most inspiring men you've likely never heard of. And for those of you who are not familiar with your New Zealand history, this man set out on a journey. And he set out on a journey in 1953 with one goal in mind: to reach the peak of Mount Everest, 29,000 feet above sea level. Now, this had been something that had never been done before. It's not to say it hadn't been attempted before. Many had attempted this journey in the past and perished along the way. And so you could pretty much say that Edmund had his work cut out for him. He got to work. He started assembling a team of experts that could lead him through this journey up the side of Mount Everest. Over 400 team members making up his team. And it was a very expensive journey, as you could imagine. He had to go and request budget from the government in order to be able to afford it. And they carried over 10,000 pounds of resources up the side of Mount Everest. Now, of course, they had to plan everything out. All of the camps, all the stops, all the obstacles. They had to make sure they had a rock-solid game plan for this 3-month journey, because if they didn't, it would surely mean the death of his team. And lo and behold, on a balmy day in March of 1953, Edmund and his team set out. They set out on that carefully mapped out plan that they had spent months and months preparing for. You know, and things went pretty well. They got to their first camp, settled in, things were going well. Got to their second camp, reminiscing about the day. But just as they were approaching their third camp, something happened. A storm like none of them had ever seen before. The types of storms that had claimed the lives of the men who made this journey before. And so in this moment, Edmund was desperate. He had to figure out, what do I do to save my team? We're in the middle of this snowstorm. We have to figure out some kind of plan of action or they're all going to perish. Now, we're going to pause there for a second. And I want you to think about, as an agency, does Edmund's story sound familiar to something you've experienced in the past? Climbed Everest before? Now, I've worked at an agency, as mentioned, but I've also worked internally at companies. And I've worked on the marketing team, and I've also worked on the web development team. And you know what Edmund's story sounds like to me? Sounds like a website redesign. I could tell by the laugh who's had similar experiences. Sounds exactly like a website redesign. Let's pause for a second and think about your prospects. Think about your customers, what they go through when building a website. They have to assemble a team of experts that can lead them through this journey of building a website. This is you. This is the agency that they're coming to get help leading them through this journey. They have to get resources. Small and medium-sized business, $15,000 to $80,000. That's a big chunk of change for them. They have to request budget in order to make this journey. And then what do? We plan all the things out. When are things due? When are revisions due? When do we have deliverables? When are we doing QA? And the funny thing is that this actually starts to look like the side of a mountain. And it's funny because it takes you about 3 to 6 months to build a website, which is actually shorter than it took Edmund to climb Mount Everest. Little side note there. And out of all of that, getting the funding, trying to plan it out, think back to your previous redesigns. Who here has done a redesign in the last year and a half to 2 years with a client? So think about your previous redesigns. What emotions did your team experience? Specifically, maybe the last couple of weeks. What emotions? Let's hear them. Show a hand, yell them out. What do you got? Yes, sir. Anxiety. Okay, tell me a little bit more about the anxiety.
Anxiety was being able to satisfy all the requirements the client was expecting when you had a finite budget, finite time, and the customer's unable to understand what inbound really is all about.
Yeah, so it's a long process. You get towards the end, all of a sudden things you didn't talk about start coming up. Who here ever had scope creep happen? Never. Yeah, tell me your ways. But yeah, exactly, that happens to all of us. Okay, so anxiety, what other ones? Let's do a couple more. We've all been through it, so tell me another one. Over here. Go.
Hope and relief.
What's that?
Hope and relief.
Hope and relief after it's launched.
Also, the last couple weeks, you're like, oh.
You see the light at the end of the tunnel.
It's almost done.
Dear God, get me out of here. Okay, I love that one. What else? Over here, I'll pick on the front row over here. You sat in front, so you get picked on. What do we got for emotions, feelings for the team? Teeth grinding frustration / excitement. Excitement, new thing, getting launched. We're excited, but then the bitter end is tough, the last 10%. And so it's funny because at HubSpot, we were curious, what are other people saying? Is it similar to this room? And so we did a survey, and we took the responses and we put it in a word cloud to kind of see what the responses were. Here's what we found. Wow. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? So we got excitement, pride, hope, please. But equally, we have frustration, we have stress, we have anxiety, if we simplify this a little bit. Okay, and my favorite one out of all of them is this little guy, vacation. Get me the hell out of here. I want to drink on the beach right now. And the reason is that as we talked about, as you get closer, all those emotions start to flush out, a lot of times because of scope creep. Website not getting launched on time, not getting launched on budget. And we all have experienced these emotions. And remember, your prospects and your clients are experiencing these as well. So one of my observations, this is one more thing that we haven't talked about yet, which is probably why you're here, or one of the reasons, is that as an agency, we're living in a project-based business model. This happened all the time for us. We would have ebbs and flows of cash flow, right? 1 minute you have more work than you know what to do with. The next month you're wondering how you're paying your developers. Now we've figured that out on the marketing side. With inbound marketing, it's a retainer-based model, but yet we live in this world on the web side where we're still struggling. Who here, that sounds pretty familiar to the bucket you're in? Okay. It's hard to grow an agency. And so one of my observations from my years in the marketing world and web design world is that the way we go about building websites, the traditional website design process, is risky. It's not only risky for your agency from scope creep and project-based work and cash flows, it's risky for your clients, the amount of time and energy and resources and all of these things that we've talked about. Now, we get the website live, and as we talked about, this is kind of what it looks like. Thank God this thing's out the door. I don't want to touch it again. Let's move on to the inbound stuff, or let's move on to something else. And your client feels a little like this as well. But with this being said, I have a question for you. How important is your client's website to their business? Imagine if their website disappeared tomorrow. How would it impact their business? How would it impact your ability to drive results for them? Okay? Who here thinks it's probably pretty darn important to their business? If it disappeared tomorrow, it would be kind of a problem. How about, so-so, might help? Who thinks it's not important at all? Okay, so we're all on the same page. You're all agreeing. We asked the same question at HubSpot, and we found overwhelmingly we all agree. The website is pretty darn important to the success of our clients. So the real question is the next one. Knowing that, how often do you make impactful improvements to their websites? Not blogs, not landing pages, those are great. But to the core message, the core website, the homepage, how often do you make impactful improvements? Now, I'm going to ask the question, Remember what your mother said about lying? Lying's the devil. You go straight to hell. So, how many people here work on their client's website at least maybe once every 2 years? Maybe when you redesign each time we go back to the same client work. At least once every 2 years. Raise your hand. Okay, cool. Once a year you jump in and you make an update. They ask you for something, you work on something. Once a year, show of hands. Okay, every quarter you're jumping in there. Okay, pretty good. Monthly? Okay, good, I like that. Weekly? Okay, cool. So we have some liars, and what we found, no, I'm kidding. What we found was that overwhelmingly, the majority of people only make impactful improvements to their site either when they have to redesign or yearly. And then there's a bucket for quarterly. But generally speaking, it's almost half is yearly or only when we redesign. They don't want to touch it. All those bad feelings start creeping up again when they think about building on their website. And so if we take a look at the traditional website design model, the way it works, we typically have a website. And that sits for about 1.5 to 2 years until it becomes so outdated and performs so poorly that we have to embark on this 3 to 6 month redesign journey. And all of those challenges that we talked about happens in that window. And then we launch a site and we get a boost of performance, we get a boost of impact, and then it sits for 1.5 to 2 years. Now think of the other thing we do as agencies. During that 3-month redesign, we're making a lot of assumptions. Here's what we think will perform well based off of best practices, based off of a case study in some other industry we saw, based off of something we did with another client. But they're still assumptions, they're guesses. And the problem is that we launch the site and then we never go back and actually validate were any of those assumptions correct. We just assume them to be true and keep chugging along. And this is pretty crazy. We talked about this. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here. Their website is their #1 marketing asset. It's where we're driving all their inbound efforts to. If they're doing paid, it's where everyone's going to. Okay, it's where we're hosting their blog and all of that. It's their #1 salesperson, working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, nurturing people through the funnel and closing them as leads or as business. And yet we let it sit for 1.5 to 2 years with very minimal updates. And so my second observation is that not only is it risky, but the traditional website design process is not optimized for optimal results. It produces poor results. All this could be put together into my thesis, which is that the traditional website design process is broken. These challenges happen not because of a lack of skill. It often doesn't have, like they're working with talented agencies. It's not a lack of skill. It's sometimes not a lack of budget. I've worked on projects where they have unlimited budget, which makes my eyes light up, but they say unlimited budget, we still run into all these problems. It's because we're setting ourselves up for failure before the project even starts, because we're operating with a broken playbook. And so the question becomes, what is that playbook? What are we supposed to do? I've been in the web world for 20, 30 years, or 20 years. Like, this is how I've always been doing it. Well, I envision a better way. And the way it's called growth-driven design. And growth-driven design is a smarter approach to web design that reduces all of those headaches, all of those challenges, all those frustrations, the scope creep, all of those issues. How do we build a system that reduces that? It's a smarter approach to web design that maximizes results through learning about their actual users and using that learning to improve the site every single month. And it's a smarter approach to web design that you can inform other departments how they can do their job better. So as you learn about the users coming to the site, what questions they have, what their pain points are, how do they do better, how does that influence your marketing or your sales? And vice versa, as those people are learning about the user, the same user, how does that impact what you're doing on the site? So let's take a little look at what this actually looks like, what the methodology looks like. Well, it starts off probably pretty similar to what you're used to. It starts with a strategy. Okay? Some of this will sound familiar. I'll show you where it'll diverge in a minute. And so the goal of the strategy is to gain an empathetic view of your users. so that you can understand what you can build on the website to impact their life. You want to see the world through their eyes, live the world through their shoes, and build the website around helping the problems they run into in every single day. So how do we do that? Well, there's a bunch of different things that you go through in the strategy step. We're not going to go through it today because of time, but I will give you a link where you can learn. There's a deep dive on all of these different topics. But we're going to start off with goals. Where does the website fit in terms of the overall structure of the business, the overall goals that we're trying to achieve as the marketing, and make sure that that aligns with the goals that we're setting the website up for. Okay, we also want to make sure that we are building personas. You're probably very familiar with personas from inbound marketing. Here's a quiz, who here can give me a definition of a persona? Shout it out. Go. What is it? What's your target customer look like? Who is your ideal customer, and what pain points do they have? And you can bucket them based off of different pain points, an ideal representation of your ideal client, of their ideal client. Okay, so once we have that person, we have a good view of them, we can start building journey maps. We can look at where are they going in their life before, during, and after interacting with your client, and figure out how can we start weaving the website in as a part of that story. Okay, we can do things like the fundamental assumptions. So fundamental assumptions, you're going to make some assumptions about the business, you're going to make some assumptions about the persona, and you're going to make some assumptions about your website. So example, assumptions about the persona. What is their point of pain? Right? Many times you ask that to the business, but have they really gone and done the research to validate that? Or they just think that's what it is because that's what's in their head, right? We all know that clients aren't always right. There's also assumptions about the business. What's the unique selling proposition? What makes their solution better than their competitors? What's the value prop that hooks that prospect in? And also about the website. For example, what is the trigger that causes their brain to say, I need to go and find an answer? And then how do we get as close to that trigger point with the website and with solving that answer as possible? So we need to figure out those assumptions we're making and go and validate those throughout this process, because if we don't, we're going to have a crack in our foundation, and everything else we build is going to miss the mark. Okay? Oh, skipping ahead. All right, so there's a bunch of different tactics you can do. Again, probably sounds pretty similar to what you do. Ideally, you want to wrap all of this up into a global strategy to say, where does the website fit in the story of this person's life? Versus what traditional website design is, where you build a website and you throw it at them at a periodic time and hope it sticks at that point. Now, where growth-driven design gets different is that we take all of that and we start building what we call a wish list. And that's the goal of what we want to come out of the strategy with, is a wish list. It's all the impactful ideas that we can build on the site that drive value to the users going there. And then, of course, at the same point, we can extract some of that value for the business in terms of leads, in terms of sales for the business. And that could be 75 to 200 different ideas on the wish list. Okay, so it could be site elements, it could be sections and pages, features and functionality, integrations, all different types of things, whatever's going to provide value for the visitor. And once you have that wish list, it allows you to go to the second step of the methodology, which is the Launchpad website. Now, the goal of the Launchpad website is to take all of those things that we learned drive value, all those brainstorms, ideas, and build a site at its core that has all the value-driving elements for the user. So, it looks better than what they have today, it performs better than what they have today, but it is not perfect. And that's, the reality is there is no such thing as perfect. And when they chase perfect, that's what happens when you have scope creep and all the challenges and issues. But knowing that there's no way to be perfect, we need a system that will allow us to get closer, and that's why we need to get this out quickly. The reason we get it out quickly is that'll allow us to start collecting real user data, actual users, so that we can inform ourselves how to improve the site over time. This isn't a case study from some other business with a totally other audience. This isn't something that worked with another client in a totally different market. This is their actual users behaving so that we can inform how to improve. The only way we get access to that is if we launch something quickly. So the question becomes, how do you launch something quickly? Again, there's a few approaches. I think the first misconception is that you're going to just simply build a half-built site. Not true. Let's go through some of the ways that you can build a Launchpad website. And again, we're going to go over the high level. The deep dive is in the training course I'll give you at the end. First thing you can do is one option is prioritizing your wish list. So you go back to that wish list of all those different ideas, and you go through and you say, what are the 20% of the items that are going to make 80% of the impact to the user and 80% of the impact to the business? And you pull those items to the side. And then you give yourself a gut check, and you say, is this a nice to have, or is this a must have for the launch of the site? Like, is this something we could do in week 1 or week 2 or 3 after the site is launched, or is it critical for the launch? And anything that's a nice to have, you put back at the top of the wish list, and what you're doing is you're prioritizing your first month of iteration. And what you're left with is the core driving elements of what you build on that new Launchpad website. So again, that's one method. It's not right for every client, but it's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is tailoring your approach. So without getting into a deep conversation on this, many times we take an approach of a one-size-fits-all. And so we look at all the different pages and we kind of treat them all as equals. But who here knows how investment works? Anyone ever invested in like stocks, bonds? Okay, let me give you a quick lesson on investment. 101. You have company A over here, and you put $1 into company A, and you get $2 out. That's a pretty good investment. You have company B over here, you put $1 in, you get $10 out. A lot better. Who would put their dollars in business A? Who would put their dollars in business B? Okay, and those that don't raise their hand aren't making any money. It makes so much sense, and you're like, duh, Luke, what the hell are you talking about? Of course, but we don't think about our time in that same capacity. And as an agency, that's your currency. Your currency is your time. And so when you don't take that mentality of where am I investing my time and energy, you're going to start putting hours or dollars into business A and not getting the return being a metaphor for the impact to your client's results, when instead you should shift it to business B. So what does that mean for a website? Well, tailoring your approach, you're going to do an audit and you're going to figure out what are the high impact pages, what are the medium impact pages, and what are the low impact pages. And you're going to tailor a different process for each one. So the high impact pages, we've vetted those out that it's worth us putting our dollars in or our hours in because we know that those have an impact on the business. So you may have a more built out process. You're doing wireframings, you're doing prototyping, you're doing user testing. You have much more built out flow. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, when you have a low impact page, none of that is necessary. Why put your hours into that? Simply migrate the content over, give it a fresh coat of paint with CSS so it's cleaned up, and you can always come back to it in the future. So we need that mentality. So that's part of figuring out how you tailor your approach for building quickly. And lastly, the other way that you can make Launchpad websites launch quick is investing in internal efficiencies. So for agencies, the big call to action I have to you is start investing in building an internal library of pre-built templates, pre-built modules, things that you can hit the ground running and know, okay, for this client, they're going to need X, Y, and Z. I can inject those into their HubSpot portal and hit the ground running versus starting from scratch. That's one example of investing in internal efficiencies. Switching from a waterfall-based to an agile-based system is a good way to increase efficiencies by decreasing the amount of back and forth on communications and increasing the speed of the time, the velocity of the team. And another example is using tools and technology to help your team be more efficient. Project management systems and things like that. Okay? So that's phase one, the foundational phase, which is the strategy and the launch pad. Your goal for that is 45 to 60 days. Okay? Now, it's going to be different for every site. Of course, large monster enterprise site could be longer, and that's totally cool. But our goal is to get it out quicker than if we did traditional design. How many people here think that when they told a client they're going to get a brand new website in 45, 60 days, their client would freaking love them? Right? Time to value. You sign a new client, they want to see what are my results. And when you're working for 3 to 6 months and they don't see anything new on a site, they start to question, did they make the right decision? 45 days, you give them a quick time to value, they're with you all day long. But then from there, we got our Launchpad website live. We need to figure out, what do we do from here? And so we move into the continuous improvement step of the methodology, where we can start collecting real user data, start brainstorming what other high-impact items can we build on the site to drive the value, and then iterate from there. Now, one of the challenges that we ran into when at the agency we did conversion rate optimization as well, one of the problems is that you literally have a million things you could do on a website. You could update colors, you could do images, change the length of the forms, the questions you're asking on the forms, do all kinds of different things. But as we talked about, we need to be smart about our time. We need to invest in the right places. So where should we be investing our time when there's a million things to do so that it gets the most impact? Now, in order to help guide you through that, I put together what I call the website hierarchy. And you can think of the website hierarchy like a roadmap to help guide you through where you can best put your time and resources to get the best impact for your clients. Okay, that got messed up. So it allows you to, the first one says provide focus. So it allows you to provide focus for your team. Instead of doing a million things half-assed, you're doing 100% one thing and crushing it out of the park. You can provide focus to your team. It lets you set clear expectations, not only internally with the team on what they should and equally what they should not be working on, but also set expectations with the client. And lastly, it allows you to measure your progress along the way. There, in fact, is some things in that orange box I'm going to show you in a minute. And at each one of those steps, there's a metric we're going to measure to show our progress along the way. So what does it look like? Well, we're going to go quickly. The first one is audience step. Audience step, each one of these has a goal and it has a metric we measure to see if we've hit that step. So for the audience step, it's all about, do we have a fresh flow of unique new people coming to the site on a regular basis? Who knows why that might be important? I mean, other than the obvious, like we want to grow their business, but from what we talked about earlier, why was that important? Why do we need new people coming to the site? What's that? User data. How do we know what they're doing if there's no one there? We can't run experiments. We can't collect user data. It's very hard to find out how to improve. So the metric we measure is month-over-month unique visitors. And that we have a threshold, we have a goal we set with the client. When we hit that, we can move to the next step, which is the value step. And at the value step, this is where we're going to do a gut check, and we ask ourselves, did the things we build on the site, in fact, provide value to the prospects or to the audience? Or is it useless clutter? Are they not interested? Do we miss the mark? And you gut check yourself here. So there's a way to measure that. You can do something like an NPS score, where you have a little slide up on a scale 1 to 10, how useful was this content, how likely would you send this content off, so on and so forth. So we have people coming to the site, we know the things on the site provide value to them. Next, we can start figuring out how quickly are they finding that value. Does it take them 10 clicks, 10 pages, 10 things to finally unlock that value? Or how do we make it as intuitive and easy to use to unlock that value right away? So that's what we're going to do is unlock, we're going to look at how we can get that time to value for those people visiting the site as short and easy and intuitive as possible. Which will then allow us to go to conversion rate optimization step. Now everyone's got their own definition of conversion rate optimization. Let me give you mine. So on your site you have funnels, you have paths that people go through in order to complete a conversion event. And at each place we have steps. And our goal at this stage of the website hierarchy is to reduce the friction and reduce the amount of steps to get them through that funnel as quick as possible. Okay? Now, the reason we call this a website hierarchy, let me explain something for a moment. What I see a lot is people launch a site and they jump right to conversion rate optimization. They're changing landing pages, they're doing this, they're doing that. But think about this. If you skip the value step and you're spending your time, your energy, your resources trying to optimize a landing page that no one gives a shit about in the first place, you're going to be wasting your time. You're spinning your wheels. And so the reason we need to go through the value step first is to gut check ourselves that this is worth our time investing in when we get to the conversion rate optimization step. Next, stickiness. Do people come to the site? Do they find value? Do they find the value quickly? Do they go through the funnel and convert, and then we never see them again? Or do they get addicted to coming to our site? Do they come back to solve other problems? How do we get them coming back? Again, there's a metric for each one of these that we can measure our progress. Personalization. How do we go back and start looking at our personas, looking at geographic region, looking at the different pain points, whatever that segmentation is, and go through all the previous steps and try to optimize each one of the previous steps for that segment. Next, assets. So who knows what an asset of a business is? Who wants to give me a definition of an asset for a business? You're all business owners, you have assets. What are those things? Shout it out. Or you don't have assets, I don't know. You have computers, so computers are an asset. People, real estate, people and time, I totally agree. What else? Real estate, maybe one more. Like let's just think of our clients maybe. Manufacturing, they have machines. Brand could be an asset. So when you think of an asset, it's something that holds value to the business. And very much like the business has assets, your marketing department has assets. Your email list is an asset. Your social following is an asset. We talked about your website being your number one asset, things that hold value to the business. And so at this stage of the website hierarchy, you start brainstorming new ideas to build new assets for the business. For example, anyone ever use websitegrader.com? Show of hands. That's an asset that we've built at HubSpot. So the goal here at Asset is to build something that is so valuable to the users, they'd be willing to pay money for, but you offer for free. It's the whole JBureau utility. Okay, so the marketinggrader.com or websitegrader.com is an asset for HubSpot. The users get a lot of value. They get that report. They'd probably pay a couple bucks for it, and then HubSpot gets a lot of leads, a lot of trials, and a lot of user data. Moz, analytics software, they have a Google algorithm change history log so that they document every single one of the changes. Who's ever been to that and kind of check that out? Pretty helpful. You probably would pay a buck to get notified every time, but they offer it for free. So how do we look at our clients and start building those things onto their site? And lastly, promoters. When we have someone come to the site, they're finding value quickly, they're going through and converting and then coming back, they have a personalized experience and taking advantage of assets they get for free. How do we get them to go tell other people to go do all that stuff? So this is your roadmap. This is what allows you to build a peak performing site. Now, that's where we're focusing our time. Focus is key. That roadmap allows you to focus your time. The question now is, what are the steps, what are the process steps we go through while we have our focus on that particular area? And that's the continuous improvement cycle. Okay, so the continuous improvement cycle starts out with the planning phase. And really the goal of the planning phase is first determine where we should focus based off of where the website's at. Which one of those steps should we focus on? And then really it's about figuring out what are the most impactful things that we can work on at this given time. Now we determine that by the focus metric. We talked about that. Each one of those steps has a metric we measure our success. We call it a focus metric. So in the planning stage, we brainstorm based off of user data. What are all the most important things we can build that are going to have a direct impact on that focus metric? And if it's not going to increase that focus metric, let's put it on the wish list for a later date. Gives us clarity. Okay, so let's look at what you kind of go through in the planning step. We're going to use usability as an example. So in usability, you have a focus metric, you have usability. The first thing you need to do is we need to figure out, okay, what's causing the issue for the person visiting the site? What is the hang up, what's causing them to drop off? And then that allows us as an agency to start putting together some questions. Questions about our users. What challenges are there? What are they looking for? Where are they accessing it? Is it a mobile problem? Is it a desktop? All these questions. And then you take those questions and you flip them into questions you can start digging into with users, which will allow you to move on to your research. Okay, so research could be qualitative, quantitative, or observational research. The method and the type depends on what question you're trying to answer and who you're trying to ask. So they inform that. You don't just do a bunch of stuff and hope you get it. Start with a question, that informs the research, and you use that research to dig and uncover the answer to that question, which then will allow you to brainstorm those wish list items to solve that challenge, and it should correlate back to impacting that focus metric. Who's following me right now? I know I'm going quickly. I want to make sure we get maybe a second or two for questions. Okay, so from there, you brainstorm all those ideas. Now, not every idea is good. Like 95% of the ideas I come up with are shit, but that's part of the deal. So then you prioritize them. High impact, medium impact, and low impact. And the impact score is based off of how likely is it to impact that focus metric. And we take all the high impact items and we go back to 6th grade science class. And we go through the scientific method. We write a hypothesis statement. This is a real hypothesis statement from HubSpot.com, which we just relaunched, so it's a little dated now. But for Marketing Mary, our persona, visiting the homepage, that's where we were focusing our time and energy. We believe that changing the funnel tool graphic, that's the status quo item, into a interactive and linked graphic, that's the proposed brainstormed idea based off of the research we saw, will increase homepage to product page visitor flow by 5%. That's the usability, the task completion. The focus metric is task completion from homepage to product page. For Marketing Mary, visiting the homepage, we believe that changing the funnel tool graphic into an interactive and linked graphic will increase homepage to product page visitor flow by 5%. We believe this to be true because, and you cite that research, you cite a previous experiment. If you're early on, you may be citing industry case studies or best practices. That's okay when you first start. But that's where you say why you think this hypothesis is true. Then there's some housekeeping. We talked about expected impact. What's the impact score? How much effort is it for your team to be required to implement this? So how many hours? And then you can convert those hours through a formula into points, right? Who's heard of point-based pricing? Point-based pricing works perfectly with growth-driven design. Effort required is how you do that. And then lastly, experimental design, which is a confusing or scary word for basically like, how do we see if this is true or not? What measurement do we got to set up? How are we going to validate it? Is it an A/B test? Is it a cohort analysis? What are we doing to validate this hypothesis? Once we have those high impact items, we move to the second step of the continuous improvement, which is the build. This is where everyone on the team gets together and it's like the get shit done phase. No matter who you are, you're going to try and implement those high impact items. You're working as a team. In growth-driven design, we talk about pod systems. You work as a pod and you implement those high impact items and you set up those experiments to test whether or not they're true. Now you let those tests run for a bit and you can move into the learning phase. And in the learning phase, this is the goal out of this is basically we're trying to go back and figure out, did this work or not? And if not, that's okay. Like there's a stat out there, 25% of experiments fail. But what did we learn about our users? Because when we extract those learnings, when we go back around and get back to the planning phase, we're going to be smarter about the things we put on our wish list. We're going to have new questions to ask based off of what we learned. Okay? And of course, you have to publish your findings. This is key. It's work. You need to balance, make it easy, but you got to do it. Because imagine if a team member leaves. Where does all those learnings go with them? How do you respond to a client if they want to dig deeper into a problem? You need to document the things you're finding. And this will allow you to set up to the transfer step. So as we're learning about our users, how do we get together on a monthly basis and collaborate with other departments in order to try and teach them what we learned about the user? How do we teach them so that they can do a better job on the things they're doing on the marketing or sales end? I'll give you an example. Who here uses HubSpot Sales? Okay, before HubSpot Sales, anyone know what it was called? Sidekick. Anyone know what it was called before that? Signals. So when the Signals team first started, their growth team, they run a very similar process. I get a lot of inspiration from them. They were trying to figure out what trigger causes people to sign up. Is it a social trigger? Is it a authority trigger, or is it a features and benefits? So what they did is on the social trigger, they went to the app reviews on Chrome Store, literally in 30 seconds took a screenshot of the star reviews and put that up there. Do other people like this? Then they did authority. They shot an email out. The next day they got a testimonial from an industry leader, put the authority page up. Then they did features and benefits and listed out. Literally did all that in a day. Tested it, and they found overwhelmingly our audience, not some other company's audience, not some case study, our audience responds best to social proof, to social validation. So that's what drove the conversions. So now that's great. That informs the homepage. How do we take that? They didn't stop there. They went through the transfer step. They went to the marketing team, and they said, look at this thing we found. Our audience loves social proof. So the marketing team started incorporating social proof into their emails, into their landing pages, into their blog posts and content strategy, which then helped the whole system. Okay, make sense? They feed each other. It's all the same user at the end of the day. Okay, so you share those learnings. You also want to create some recommendations if you think of some things they could be doing. And then lastly, you probably have some unfinished questions you want to ask them. Those people that are on the front lines. Just like you had interviews with your users, have some interviews with your internal team, see what they're saying. Okay, and this is a process. We call it a cycle for a reason. You're going to continue through this cycle and repeat it. Focusing your time on a specific step. Go through building until you hit that goal, that focus metric, And then you can move on to the next step and focus your time and energy there. So what we end up seeing is that as you go through this process, start with strategy, build something quickly, it's better than what they have today, looks better, performs better, is not perfect, but then we move to the continuous improvement step, using that data, focusing our time and energy, going through the continuous improvement cycle. When we compare that to the traditional website design model, we now have over a month continuous improvement. And there's a whole area of opportunity that we unlock that's not possible in the way we're doing things with traditional design. Now, of course, marketing and sales is a layer that lives on top. I like to say growth-driven design is like a Ferrari, but you still need gas for the Ferrari to go. And so that's what marketing and sales is. So I get questions from agency, how do you package and price your services all together? We have a course that's on that. I'll show you where to get it, but it should be one retainer. We're all marching to the same goal. Let's have one retainer that allows us to have flexibility between all three of those services to get the results for our clients. So really quickly, a lot of the things we talked about, wrapping up here. Growth-driven design, you're now spreading the cost load over time. Okay? You're launching quick and improving versus having to dump 6 months and a ton of time and resources. It's on an Agile-based system, so anyone who's familiar with Agile, you probably looks pretty familiar. This is built off of an Agile backbone. That's kind of the machinery behind that drives it. So you have on time and on budget. You're using data to make your decisions versus guesses, versus what looks pretty, versus what the trend is. And then lastly, you're continuously improving. I'll give you a second for that. Okay, so from an agency's perspective, the things we talked about, this is a retainer-based business model. You get to flip your model on its head. You get to upsell your existing inbound clients, increase the size of their retainer. People coming to you only want website, get them in the door with growth-driven design, and then you can always upsell them into inbound as well. Again, we talked about Agile, helps your scope creep. Your development team's going to love that. And then lastly, it's a packaged methodology, right? When we think about inbound is all these things. It's social, it's email, it's blogging and content marketing, and inbound packages all of that into an easy to communicate to prospects and sell, and an easy package for the team to execute. We've never had that on the website. We've had disjointed pieces of usability, and we've had conversion rate, and we've had this and that. This is a system that ties all that together, that's easy to sell to prospects and easy for your team to execute on. Okay, it's also a differentiator and helps with client retention. We won't talk about those too much. Okay, so I want to wrap up today by going back to our friend Edmund. And last we left off Edmund, he was in a predicament. He was in the storm of his life. He had to figure out, what do I do with my team? If I don't think of something quickly, we're surely going to perish. And he was so desperate, but all of a sudden, in his moment of most desperation, a light bulb went off. And he said, I don't have to go through that carefully mapped out plan that we spent months and months and months planning. I can take in data, take in visibility, take in team's morale, the obstacles in my way. At every moment, I can take in those things and determine how do I best adjust and move up the side of the mountain to get to the top. And lo and behold, on a balmy day in May of 1953, Edmund and his team reached the peak of Mount Everest. And so, I'm going to leave you here today with a quote from Edmund. And he says, I will come again and conquer you. Because as a mountain, you cannot grow. But as a human, I can. And so that's what I ask of all of you today. To grow as a web development agency. To grow as marketers. To grow out of the broken, traditional website design process. And to start building peak performing websites using growth-driven design. Thank you very much. Now, as I mentioned, you're probably wondering, what are the tools? How much are the retainers? What does the proposal look like? How does my team execute it? Okay, I have a course. You all know about HubSpot Free, but it's one way to get started on clients that aren't getting that user data. But on growthdrivendesign.com, you can sign up for the agency course. We have a certification in the HubSpot Academy. You do not need to be a partner. Any agency can sign up. There's 13 classes that dives into all of this. I have tools, templates, resources to help your team. Okay, so that's your next step if you want to learn more, along with the slides and the presentation are there as well. We're also doing Media Junction, who in their first 8 months sold $550,000 of GDD retainers. Them and I are doing a session tomorrow. I believe it's at 11:30, 11:45. Check the schedule. Check that. They're going to talk about their journey, how they sell, how sales have changed for them over the year they've been doing this, and then we're going to have a discussion. So if you have questions, we can talk about it there. Thank you very much.